we usually start on the go physio meetings with a care to care, which I'll do in a moment, and then we've done the introduction, so I'll just introduce myself briefly. There'll be a presentation around fatigue. I had gone on fatigue pacing as part of my presentation, so what I'll do is I'll move through it. I'll be quicker than 45 minutes, and then we'll have a bit of chat at the end. But as I said, you're welcome to interrupt me, and I feel like I need to put the disclaimer. My children are older, they're 14 and 10, but my husband's out. I've told them not to interrupt me, but we'll do our best, because you never know when vicious fights might break out that need my intervention, but they are under strict instructions. So this is our on-the-go care to care, and when I say it at home by myself, I can say it fast and I think I say it well. When I say it in public, I get nervous, so please forgive me. But I'll see that, and then we'll talk through the English. So, tēnei tātou e whai ana, e te aratika, mana tangata e whai ora, aha koa nā piki, me nā hiki, kia tūtoko, kia ako, kia mahi, tahi, tātoa. So I appreciate you letting me just to start and really draw us into what we're doing tonight. And at On The Go Physio, we work, the English translation is that we pursue the correct path for people seeking wellbeing. So that's for all our clients, that we do our best by the people we come across, no matter what challenges their journey holds. And the most important part here, I think, is that we support, we learn, and we work beside and together. So this particularly tonight, I would be the least outdoorsy person in this meeting. Anya said she just got back from Queenstown, so she definitely beats me on that one. And what I want to bring is my knowledge of fatigue management in general. And then, of course, you will have your experiences and your immense knowledge to share as well. And I'm sure that I will learn tonight as well. This is the tricky part, because, again, I can't see your faces. So I just want you to think to yourself, how much impact does fatigue have on your life? So it's 0 being no impact and 10 being the hugest impact imaginable. If you find this interesting, if you simply just Google Fatigue Severity Scale, there's a short scale there. It can be really good to have a number around your fatigue if you need to communicate it to your GP, if you're needing to communicate it to someone, or if you want to have a snapshot in the same way that we might know how much we weigh at any time. It's quite good to know what your fatigue is, so you might be able to compare it in 6 months' time. So if you're interested, scribble that down, Fatigue Severity Scale, and have a wee look online. So our team, you've met Anya. We've also got Kat and Camilla, who work specifically with people with neurological conditions, but they are both on a meeting tonight learning more about neuro conditions. So my background is that I previously worked at MS and Parkinson's in Christchurch. I worked there for 8 years as their physio, and in that time I was involved in the development of a program called Minimise Fatigue, Maximise Life for people with MS. I'm putting a wee disclaimer there because that's a photo of my second daughter, who's now 10, and I finished in that role when I had her. So the fatigue work that I've done is older. So if you've done a lot of research yourself, you may think, oh, that's not right anymore. What I'm hoping is we'll talk general principles that hopefully haven't changed. And then, as I said, you'll take what you can from it. So I would just talk about the program for a wee moment. It was developed by people living with fatigue. So it was, when we developed the program, we wanted it to be valid. And the way to make it valid was that it was designed by people living with fatigue. It's specific for MS. It was developed for people with MS. However, what we know is that neurological fatigue is broad. And so through the presentation tonight, I apologise, it will say MS in most places, but I'd like you to just think about that more broadly to include FND and any other neurological condition. The program is a 6-week program, and people meet in a group of up to 6 people for 2 hours every week. And so that's 12 hours in total, and I'm going to try and cover it in about 40 minutes, 30 minutes tonight. So we'll see how I go. I can't see if you're grinning at my optimism or not, so I'll presume you are.
I think it's going to be great.
Thanks. So this is something that I may not need to tell you. what is fatigue? So here again, using the MS statistics, it's that they think 75 to 90% of people with MS experience fatigue, and it's often the worst symptom. So it's the thing that stops people actually carrying on with their old life. So if we think about leg symptoms, you can potentially, depending on what your job is, you can potentially get around those. But if you're exhausted, you may not be able to go to your job, or manage everyday life. So it's unique to MS or neurological conditions. And I think this is interesting that people might not understand is the unpredictability and the disproportionate, which means that one day the things that you do may not cause fatigue and the next day they might. It's unpredictable and you just can't tell. A small amount of something might cause a big amount of fatigue. If you're living with a neurological condition, then the fatigue will make those other symptoms worse. So I had one man who talked about his vision. That was one of his signs of fatigue, is that when his vision started getting blurry, that meant he was tired. It's unrelated to the severity of MS. So again, if we think about severe neurological conditions, might be someone that needs to use a wheelchair to mobilise. You might be able to mobilise perfectly well and your fatigue might be worse than the person that's using a wheelchair. So if we think about the whole spectrum of symptoms with a neurological condition, fatigue doesn't necessarily tie in. And this is the last part that you potentially are nodding along to, and that it's invisible, often misunderstood, and very rarely treated. So one of the women involved in the development described her fatigue as it is not a healthy tired that is so satisfying following a hard day's work. It's a draining, sickening tired that engulfs you. It weighs you down, nauseates, as well as crushing your spirit. So that was a woman who had 20 employees and was trying to run a business. Oh, sorry, I thought I had another one there. So I'll move on there. The other thing with fatigue is that it can be physical, mental, or emotional. And I think we're going to talk about recognising your own fatigue. And it's really good to acknowledge that it can be any of those. And therefore, how you recover and how you manage it may be different depending on what sort of fatigue it is for you at that time. And so Anita, who was in her 30s, said you wouldn't think that it could be tiring just to talk. Even going out for lunch can be tiring. Don't get me started on shopping. So the consequences of fatigue, some of the consequences, is that it can affect people's ability to work in a regular job, carry out their normal life. So whatever your role is in your normal life, whether you are an active daughter, whether you're an active parent, whether you have good friends, whether you're a supportive partner, whether you cook the dinners, those things can all be affected. Severe fatigue can affect people's ability to look after themselves. So things such as showering, eating proper meals, getting out the door to an appointment and exercising. It can make the other challenges of living with MS or FND harder. And this is the thing that I think we're kind of trying to focus on tonight, is to do the things that bring joy. So the things that make them or you. And that's where we're looking at that, getting into the outdoors. So the principles of the whole program were to, first of all, identify and address all the possible causes of fatigue, which is what I'll go into a little bit soon. So this is why it's minimised fatigue. So the idea is you figure out everything that could be causing you fatigue and manage that. Then when you know, it's a tricky concept, and I don't know if I explained it that well, but once you know what your actual energy is, that you use it really effectively. So that's when we'll talk more about the pacing. So let's consider, and this is the slide that I'm probably the most worried about, the age of it. So there may be more information now, but we know that with MS in particular, there is something central that does cause fatigue, something that 10 years ago was unknown. And then the outside of that are things that would cause anybody with any condition or to have fatigue. When we do this in the course, what we do is we get people to put a wee asterisk. So again, if you've got pen and paper, you might want to scribble down the things that you think apply to you. There's the very logical poor sleep. There's diet and nutrition. If you have a current relapse, so if your FND or your MS is currently stirring up, then of course that will cause fatigue. With people with MS, bladder infections can be common, and that will cause an increase in fatigue. in there it says other symptoms as well. So, for example, if you have a weak leg, then every step is going to take more energy than if you didn't. So the pure symptoms that the physical symptoms can be fatiguing. It might be something unrelated to your neurological condition. So you might have never even considered that you're actually a bit anemic. You feel that this is a neurological fatigue, but there may be other causes. The one that I can relate to the most myself is the individual situation. So that is just, your plate, what's on your plate with your roles and your workload. Mood can have a huge impact on fatigue, to the point where there was one of the studies they did, they really had to tease out doing an assessment of depression, because the symptoms of depression were so similar to the symptoms of fatigue. So being really aware of mood and stress and anxiety and how they can play a part. For MS, I don't know about FND, but I know for MS, heat sensitivity can be a huge issue, but actually also cold. So if we think about the temperature that you're operating in, which again might become relevant for the outdoors, medications and not being fit enough, which is an interesting topic in itself when we're talking about having the energy to exercise. So again, if there's anything that jumps out at you, then write that down for yourself as something you might want to come back to. The very first step in fatigue, so we've talked about some of the potentials, causes, but the very first step is to write down, or to understand your own fatigue. And when we do the course, we do a fatigue diary. And every time I presented the fatigue diary, I had people rolling their eyes or just looking very unenthusiastic about it. And without fail, everyone came back and said that was brilliant. So it's the idea of not, you don't know until you know. So I would recommend, there's a sample up there. Again, because this was 10 years ago, everyone was doing it on pen and paper. There'll be apps, there'll be all sorts of other ways you can do this now. And I do remember one of the women was actually going into the outdoors for week 1 of the fatigue course. So she just chose, rather than taking her folder, because everyone got a folder, she chose to just scribble it in a notebook that she kept in a plastic bag in her pack and then in the glove box of the car. But the idea there is to write down the time, what you're doing and what fatigue rating you'd give it out of 10. So again, I'm the sort of person that loves writing down notes. So if this is something you might want to do, feel free to scribble yourself a note about that now. If somebody came to me now for one-on-one physio and said they had fatigue, this would be the first thing I did with them. So a couple of people on the course have said it wasn't until I did the diary that I started to understand. It made me realise it's not normal for most people to need a rest by the time they've got themselves up and through the shower. Once I understood what was happening, it was easier to do something about it. And then Angela said, I found the fatigue diary straightforward. How can one make changes without actually seeing how we spend our time? I was amazed how my life as a stay-at-home mum was so reactive to the needs and wants of my family. And I would always remember Angela because she was a woman of action. So she did the diary. She's also a woman with some money, obviously, because she came back a week later and she said, halfway through the week, it's only week 1 I did the diary, I realised that because I don't work, the family uses me as a taxi and I'm exhausted just from driving. And so they went out and bought a second car and her husband became the taxi driver. So for her, that was one of the most significant things that she did to manage her fatigue, and it made this huge difference. And like I said, she did that halfway through the first week just by writing down and reflecting. So there's huge power in reflection. With that fatigue diary, what we then get people to do, they come back after week 1 and we talk about managing fatigue. And this is a concept that I think is really important. I hope you can see them okay. There's these two, my cursor's working. This is poorly managed fatigue, and we'll talk a bit more about this boom and bust, where you might not have fatigue, then you have extreme fatigue, then low fatigue, high and up and down. That yellow line, which I've done very inexpertly, imagine that it goes straight. That yellow line is what we talk about as your limit, and that's personal. So here, what we ask people to do was to say what was their limit, like what fatigue were they prepared to accept. I had one woman who worked for an international corporation who had deadlines. So she was prepared to accept that sometimes to get a deadline done, she would go above her limit as long as she had recovery time. And so that was her choice. Whereas for other people, they knew that they could never, if they hit their limit, then they couldn't look after their kids. So they had to always stay below their limit. So this is a really personal choice for you. This diagram here is well-managed fatigue, where in that circle there, you've identified what your limit is. And what we would hope is with well-managed fatigue is that you will never go above what you've identified as your limit. So you may come up and down, but once you've set your limit, successful fatigue management would be to not hit it. So part of that diary here is to then identify what makes your fatigue worse. And also, equally important, what decreases your fatigue. And if you're considering the different sorts of fatigue, I know I had one woman whose fatigue was really, really physical. So when she got home from work, what decreased to her fatigue was resting with her feet up, and she'd watch TV. There was somebody else and their fatigue was also mental, and when they came home, the thought of there being TV on and other things in the background made their fatigue significantly worse. So for them, they had to go to their room, just shut the curtains and have some chill time for 10, 15 minutes to help bring them back to level. And that's where the diary becomes really handy, that really getting to know yourself and what works. And of course, that first principle is self-management, self-reflection, so understanding, and then making an action plan. This is a personal example of boom and bust. So we talk about pacing, and you've probably heard the phrase boom and bust. If you haven't, this was me booming. So I had COVID about a month ago, felt awful for a week. And normally I'm quite good at having the freezer stocked. I had nothing in the freezer, and my husband's a useless cook, and it was all disastrous. So as soon as I had energy, I spent a whole day, and that was my cooking. So you've got pumpkin soup, chicken soup, green soup, chicken stock, and spag bowl. That took me all day. And the next day I got up and walked the dog. I went back to bed at 10 o'clock and I slept till 4 that afternoon. So I thought this is classic boom and bust behaviour, where I completely overstretched on one day and then paid the price the next day. So these are the patterns you're looking for to identify in yourself. And my fatigue management was terrible because I should have known better, but I was feeling great. I'd started making all the soups, and I don't know if you're soup makers, but once they're all cooking, you have to blend them and you've got to jar them up. You can't leave them. So there's my personal boom and bust cycle recently, because I am dipped and forgot. So with fatigue, the next step, once you've identified what causes your fatigue and had that really good look at yourself and your life, then you've got 4 options. Option 1 is to dump things. So this is looking at what you do on a day-to-day basis, the things that cause fatigue, and deciding, do I need to do them? So some examples I think I've had there is, one example is ironing sheets. I don't know if anyone in the world irons sheets anymore. Another example there might be going to the supermarket, when really with a tiny bit of effort you can learn to do online shopping. So, are there things that you're doing because you've always done them, but actually you don't need to do them at all? So that's you dump it. Delay it are the things that you still might need to do, but you could wait until you've got more energy. So you might decide at that minute to delay it, or it might be something that you plan out in terms of delaying it. I've had the example we had there was washing your hair. Like, it might need doing today, but could you get away with a wee bit of spray and shampoo and do it in a couple of days' time instead? The delegate it is the things that someone else could do just as easily. So again, they might be things that you've always done. The example we've got there is, could actually your kids do it if you've got kids, or could your spouse go and do that job for you? And then the do it. So the do it is the stuff that you either really can't not do, so the things that you have to do, or the things that you want to do. So we've dumped, delayed, or delegated the stuff that causes us fatigue that actually we'd rather, we don't have to do, and we're left with the stuff we've got to do. And this is where we come on to finally to what you've all been waiting for, is the pacing. So we're still on the doing it, but you're doing it smarter. We have 4 Ps now, so I've gone from the 4 Ds to the 4 Ps, and there's a lot of crossover here, but this is your planning, your prioritizing, your pacing, and your preserving of energy. So this is Dawn's example. I know that I cannot expect to be able to do my exercise program at the gym, do some grocery shopping on the way home, and then have the energy to put the groceries away and cook tea. It's a no-brainer now, but I had to learn it the hard way. So that was something that came to her during the course. Joss, he said, planning, that's a big part of everyday life. If you don't plan on how you're going to roll, if you just go out into the wilderness, then you're going to crash and burn. So Joss was cool, and that was his take on pacing and planning out his day. So when we run the course, and I know we haven't quite got the time now, but it's about pausing and thinking, what would planning look like for you? Are you the sort of person that has everything on your phone? Are you all Google Calendars? Are you pieces of paper and yellow highlighters? Are you a diary person? What does it look like? What can you and your whānau cope with? How does that look for you? What's realistic? What would it look like for work? So this one here, Marika said, I learned to decide if it was really important to do things at a particular time, or even if I needed to do them at all. And that can be challenging, particularly if you've always done things. So yes, sorry, there's that example of using highlighters. And then how are you going to communicate that to the other people in your life? The pacing yourself. So sorry, I'm just going to go back quickly. But sorry, I have screwed that up. Planning. So planning, what I haven't said there is actually looking at your week. So looking at all the things you've got to do and deciding what day, what time you're going to do them. The highlighter comment is about prioritizing. And that might be that you put a yellow highlighter by the stuff you've got to do. Like if you've got kids that need picked up at 3, that's a bit of a non-negotiable. But maybe, grabbing something from the dry cleaners or getting a prescription that you don't need for 2 weeks is something you can drop if you need to. So if your fatigue that day is out of control, then actually you can go, nah, I need to save all my energy for that, picking up the kids. That's my one essential thing today. Everything else is fine. We can have fish and chips for tea. The pacing is the hard one. And as you can see from my soup example, I haven't mastered that. And the first part of that pacing is the recognising the boom and bust and trying to avoid that. Rest, and we will have time to stop because I'm really interested to know how you apply this to the outdoors, and this will be what you tell me. Pacing has rest in it, and that can be planned rest where you say, right, I'm going to do this job, and then I'm going to allow myself 2 hours before the next activity. Or I'm going to get home from work and I'm just going to park in the garage and rest for 10 minutes doing nothing or doing a Wordle or whatever you need to recover before you hit the house. So rest can be planned, it can be timed, and it should fit the fatigue type you've got. So do you need physical rest? Do you need mental rest? Do you need emotional rest? This is really essential, and I think this is probably a point I suspect you're going to tell me this is really important in the outdoors, which is to recognise the early signs. So you'll all have fatigue signs that if you don't know them already, you'd pick up in the diary. And again, because I have done a few first aid courses, think of those early signs of hypothermia where, you could probably push on maybe, you might be tempted to. I would think if you can get to know what your early signs of fatigue are, making sure that you stop then and take the rest that you need. I gave the example, I think it was Joss, for him it was vision. So if his vision started going blurry, that was his first sign that he was getting fatigued. I'm trying to think what other people's tells were, but you'll know yourself. And then break before you hit that limit. The next one there that I've put a little pause is called preventative rest, and you may have heard of that or you may not have. This was just one of many concepts that we talked about, but this one was huge for people. So people would come back and say that is one of the things that made the biggest difference. And I should probably pause here and say that program that we did, we were very, very lucky, and we had some researchers on it. So it's had about 5 international publications done around that program. So we really know what worked. And that was one of the big things. Excuse me 1 second. I'm just in here, I'm on a meeting. That was one of the things that people said made a huge difference. And it's kind of logical. It's resting before you need to. This was usually planned. So this would be that you've got your best friend's 21st. You really want to go to the whole 21st, so you plan to do nothing else that day. You have a sleep in the afternoon and you're saving up your energy. So that's that concept there. And I was really surprised how frequently that came up as being something that people found really helpful. The preserving your energy is about doing things smart. So doing the same thing, but doing it with a twist. And again, Dawn, you read this, it seems so simple, but she says, analysing my days to find where I needed to plan rest times, looking at which activities caused most fatigue and using the Ds to manage them helped me immensely. In the morning, attempting to stand and dry my hair was exhausting. My solution, attach an extension cord to the dryer. Now I sit comfortably. So pretty simple stuff. She's a smart woman, Dawn, but it wasn't until she did the diary that she realised. Lou, who was a businessman, so very office-based, said, I find fatigue from using the computer can be improved if I type in bold, use a large font and double spacing. When I'm finished, I highlight it all and just restore it to the more appropriate font. So nice practical solutions. The preserving your energy, I'm starting to think when we're talking about the outdoors, we'll be talking about potentially using poles, if there's other equipment. So again, I'm interested in your thoughts on that. The communication side of things we were never sure where to put this in the course because it comes from day one. And it's about who you choose to communicate with about your fatigue, because not everyone will get it. So it's deciding who you do need to tell about it and what works. And we talked a lot about a shared language. So when I wrote the program, I had young children. And so what really resonated with me was using that phrase, it's time to put our feet up. So for because I had one daughter and I was pregnant with the next one. And so that was the phrase, it's time to put our feet up. So when I was knackered, it became something that was regular so that my daughter was used to hearing it. Another woman said that she had a chair and her husband knew that when she went and sat in her resting chair, you just need to leave her alone. Like that was her signal. That was her way of communicating. People have talked about battery power as being quite a nice one. I'm going to hit red. I just need to sit down for 10 minutes. And as you'll know, if you've got other people in your life, because as we said at the beginning, fatigue's invisible, it can be really hard for them to understand, and there can be frustration on both sides. So communication can be huge. Marika says communication is a must. Fatigue may not be particularly obvious to others, and I learned who I should share it with. So she was talking about her work environment there, that actually she didn't bother sharing it with a lot of people. She just chose a couple of close people. And Joss, my brother, says, why don't you come up to Golden Bay and see me? And I'm like, do you know how far that is? Do you know how fatiguing that is? So Joss, like me, is Christchurch based. What we can't cover, sorry, I'm just going to quickly look at my phone to see the time. Oh, yeah. So what we definitely can't cover tonight, and that we do cover on the 6-week program, was to then go through a whole number of different things that help fatigue. And there's some logic in these. We did a whole session on sleep quality. These are the things you can Google if you have any trouble with sleep. If you just look up sleep hygiene, it's all sensible things you've heard before. But if you know sleep's an issue for you, then now would be the time to think, right, I need to actually conquer this. And it is the things like keeping your bedroom a certain temperature, not going on devices after dinner, those couple of hours before bed. And there's a huge number of very easy to find advice online there. We haven't covered resting, or actually I did a little bit. Relaxation and meditation can be amazing for fatigue management, as can breathing properly. The breathing and the breath work is something that can be huge. You can look at it from a sort of a yoga or meditation point of view, or you can get quite scientific, and there's physios, I'm not one of them yet, but there are physios who specifically work with breathing. And there's a very famous international physio, and her byline is, if you can't breathe properly, you can't function. And she works a lot with kids with physical disabilities on getting their breathing right, and then looking at mobility and the link in there. We can't cover exercising. I know you're all outdoors people, so looking at safe exercise. The one line I'll quickly say, though, is that you shouldn't exercise until your fatigue's controlled. If your fatigue is controlled, then exercise is brilliant, because the fitter you are, the less energy is required to do things. But it's something that is what the evidence suggests, and what my experience would suggest, that you need to have exercise planned like all your other activities, and not push when you are fatigued. So being fit enough, managing heat sensitivity if that's an issue, diet and nutrition, there's huge amounts available of information, mood and stress. And that last one, I think I've kind of hinted at, but really identifying your values and your priorities when you're looking at fatigue management. It might be that you don't go to your mother-in-law's 70th birthday, well, maybe not your mother-in-law's, a distant relative's 70th birthday party, if you want to go tramping the next day, because that's your priority. I'm not sure that was the best example, but you'll understand what I mean there. Identifying what is important and letting some of the other stuff slip away. Again, sorry, I'm just quick check. Yep, we're almost done there. So a quick summary there, and I thought here, what are the key things for the outdoors? Understanding your fatigue seems pretty important. Recognizing your limits, because I feel that in day-to-day life, if you get really exhausted at home, you're not in a dangerous situation, whereas when you're in the outdoors, it could be particularly very dangerous. Using your 4Ds, your dump, delay, your delegating, you're doing it smarter. You're planning, prioritizing, pacing, and preserving energy. And then considering the equipment that you use, how you might be communicating with the others in your group, whoever you're out with. Once you understand about your nutrition that supports your fatigue management, how do you translate that nutrition into an outdoors environment? Sleep. How do you translate the things you know about sleeping into sleeping on a bedroll? And how will you manage hot and cold? That's hard for anybody in the outdoors. So what other special techniques might you need? And then that general fitness. We know that fitness should be specific. So if you are walking outdoors, then the fitness training that you should do should relate specifically to the skills you need walking outdoors. If you're swimming, like I heard you saying, Duncan, then you would be doing swimming training. I am going to close now. It doesn't work online. I've got a really lovely clip of Te Araha as our closing karakia, but instead I will just wish you all love, hope, and peace. And then I will stop screen sharing and we can chat. I'll try to stop screen sharing.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jessie. That was super helpful. I've been writing lots of notes. I think some great stuff there.
Good. Thank you. It's so nice to see your faces. Sorry, I couldn't. It's very hard to judge the pace there, but I hope that was helpful. I'd love to know what you thought, if there's any concepts in there that were new, or anything that might not be new, but you went, actually, I need to work on that, or that rings true.
I think one thing that really struck me was that, there are two things, I suppose. One was the prevention of rest, but probably also the whole matter of communication, because I know that my wife Bex and I, when I got sick a few years ago, my inability to communicate, and that was a huge source of conflict within our relationship, and I think caused her a lot of stress. And but then also, and I still find that quite hard to admit to myself and to others how I'm actually feeling. But also, in the context of outdoorsy friends who might be more able-bodied, it's still quite hard to sort of be like, oh yeah, I'm feeling tired when everyone else is feeling great still. And so that issue of communication really stood out to me.
Thank you.
How about you all?
I put down, I took a lot of notes. It was awesome, by the way. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carol.
So one thing that I've done after one of the last sessions we've done, I have the checklist to look at my status every day. So my physical, mental, emotional, family, and spiritual. So I added fatigue. I think it would be a great thing to just put it there in my checklist. And then I think it was really good to remind myself how fatigue is physical, mental, and emotional, and how that there's different way to recover, because I've been trying to be really mindful about my fatigue and how does it look like when I'm fatigued, but I haven't done much work on tells. As Nick said as well, the preventative rest, like I had no idea about it. So that was quite like, okay, I can bank on rest before doing something quite out of the ordinary, because I really struggle. Like even if like I try to go to bed like after 9 o'clock, like if I have a dinner at friends and maybe they want to play game afterwards, like I struggle, like that messes up my entire night. But maybe if I have a rest before, perhaps I can manage that.
Nice.
So thank you.
Cool, thank you.
Thanks, Jessie. That was really interesting and very informative. I suppose with my fatigue, a lot of it's been try and and see where that limit is, and then reassess from there. And that's the only way I can really sort of as long as it's I've had to learn to do it within a safe environment, I suppose you could say. Like especially when I ocean swim a lot, so I don't go as far as I used to. I always go with a group and things like that. So those sorts of things have been really important to me. And I also suffer from physical fatigue because of my atrophy in my left leg. And again, that's just and again, what Raphael said, those other ones, the mental, the physical, all of those, which I've only ever really thought of it as being a physical one. So it's good to take those on board and actually say, well, maybe it's mentally fatigued, instead of putting it all on the physical side. So yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Cool, thank you, Duncan.
Yeah, that was really brilliant. Thank you so much. I took so many notes. I think this has been really helpful for me to identify what I do already, like preventative rest and planned rest, and like I really structure my rest, and just I think the biggest takeaway for me is that I have really worked on for the last like 3 years, my focus has very much been just the emotional fatigue first, getting used to the idea of living with neurological disorders, and then the physical. Last year I was able to start focusing on getting physical fitness back and physical ability again, and then this year, now that my fitness is feeling good, I'm starting to try and work with my rest and pacing around mental fatigue, and mental fatigue for me is by far the hardest. It's quite frightening for me to come back into, and I haven't been able to work since I got my diagnosis in 2021, and I really, there's so much emotion around that as well, because I had a career I was really passionate about. So any re-engagement in my mental side is actually also very emotional. So this is extremely helpful for me to now look forward and be able to feel a little less daunted by what's ahead of me. So thank you.
Oh, cool. Thank you, Ronnie. And as I said, it's a 6-week course. And when we did, what I knew, but the research also showed, is that there was two key values, and like 50% of the value was sitting in the room with other people who experience fatigue. And that was way more valuable. And when I taught other people to run the course, because it was other physios and OTs and health professionals running the course, and we like to talk. And one of the things I'd say in the training is our job is to say a little bit and then shut up. Like that's really important, because the people in the room who are actually walking the same journey have so much knowledge.
Yeah.
And so that's it really. I wish I could have done the 6-week course with you. I think you've all got a lot of knowledge and experience there.
Yeah. Super grateful to be here tonight. Thank you, Nick, for this.
Ronnie, you just said something like that just made me like a light just lit in my head. Like I plan so much my activities and my work, I don't plan any rest. It's kind of, I assume it's going to happen. So I just added that to my notes. I'm going to have to plan downtime now mindfully. So thank you about that.
It's a game changer.
That's something which
I also thought the something like the diary would be a really good tool as well. That's something I've noted down and something that I can have conversations with the clients about in the future as well. Sounds really good, Jessie. Thank you for that.
You'll have to convince them because no one's keen, but it does help hugely.
Have to go off your experiences with people. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
My psychologist got me to start an energy diaries a few months ago. So I started tracking and just started seeing patterns, what happens when I don't sleep, or how many days things last. And yeah, that was incredibly good. I'm still doing it.
Yeah. It's amazing, isn't it, that self-reflection that with the preventative rest, I because again I don't have any neurological fatigue, but I just have a busy life. And one thing that I've really embraced is when I get in the door with the kids from school pickup, is I try and do a 20-minute sit on the couch, and I have a whole litre of water at the same time, because I think we don't specifically talk about hydration, but my little rule to myself is I'm not allowed to get up until I've drank the bottle. And it's usually about 20 minutes, and that works really well. And I actually play Catan on my phone. So one game of Catan, drink a litre of water. And it's amazing how that actually then revitalizes you. So that's a preventative planned rest that I try and use in my life.
When I was out at Burwood Hospital, that idea of a preventative rest was super helpful for me as well. And just thinking about it, like Raffaello, exactly what you're saying. I used to get struggle if I was invited out to something and felt like I needed to go home early, and to sort of rest beforehand, or to allow for time for rest beforehand and afterwards. It does mean that you can do planned boom busts, and I found that quite a helpful concept as well. And that while boom busts are not great as a general way of life, that sometimes, and like for me, often a tramp might be a bit of a planned boom bust, where I'll push myself just a little bit more, and I know that I'll be really tired, that it might be a bit of a bust afterwards. Don't go too hard, so there's not too much of a bust afterwards, but by bookending it with rest, maybe that's okay.
Yeah. I think that's great, and I sort of tried to touch on that a wee bit, because you're in charge of yourself, you know, and you're allowed, you know, we're grown ups, you're allowed to choose, and that goes back to that values and priorities. So if that's your value and your priorities to get out there, then planning around it's smart, but you choose where your limits are, and you might shift them. You know, you might say, right now I am gonna to push.
And there are definitely activities where I'm like, this is 100% not worth a bust, you know, and so I don't boom on them. I just like, no. And so because they're not in line with my values. So I feel like
you dumped it.
Yeah, nice. I'm still enjoying the soup that I killed myself to make, to be honest. I'm still enjoying it as I get out a single serve of pumpkin soup. Like, yeah, that was good.
You know, I think that the like you're saying, Jessie, the planning, I think that's really important about how you plan things throughout the day. Or for me, it's extremely, being a teacher and that, you know, I'm so used to being that organised, but also now I have to organise myself and around my MS. And I actually laugh now. I used to cry, but now I laugh. Like tonight, I had 3 post-it notes around the house not to miss this meeting. So I had one on the stove because I was cooking dinner. and one on the computer, and I had one on the front door. So, you know, and that's what I have to do, just to make sure that, yeah, because that fatigue. But yeah, the planning is really important, I think, to make sure that you know, come down crashing.
I was thinking as well with the planning as you were giving the talk, Jessie. I don't know whether you guys are already aware of the app. There's a really, really great app called All Trails. And it's so I would use it to like look for different hikes, or tramping as you might call it. And it would show you the like elevation and the length of the walk. And it's also got difficulty ratings. And it's such a great app, and it allows people to make comments as well. So people leave reviews of how they found the walk, and you know, even just thinking about prioritizing, was the waterfall worth going to see, you know, that sort of thing. And people can like take photos and they'll upload it as a review to that walk as well. And I just thought, if you guys weren't already aware of it, it's such a great app. It is free to use, but there's an option to, if you can also like pay a subscription if you want to like download the maps. But yeah, I just thought I'd share that with you guys.
Cool.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, Nick, are you done with me?
Well, I suppose one other, well, oh yes, the time. Maybe one other quick, or two things. First of all, I thought that I would, I've got access to a fatigue diary that I can send out to anybody who's keen. So I'll send it out with the recording. But one thing which I thought was just really interesting was this whole thing of looking for your fatigue signs, and how are people just feeling in terms of time? Because I wondered if it would be helpful just to quickly race through like what some of those signs might be for people, how people feel time.
I might, Nick, I'm sorry, I will actually go because I've got
absolutely
that I've promised, but you don't need me for this part. This is the power of people with lived experience.
No worries.
So I'll say it's lovely to meet you all, and Nick, I know we'll
Thank
stay
you.
anyway. So good night from me, and enjoy the rest of your conversation.
Thank you.
And thank you so much, Jessie. Really, really appreciate it. So thank you.
Excellent. Cool. See
no
you.
Worries. We'll catch you later on. See ya.
Bye.
Cool. So yeah. So what are some of your tells?
It's funny because to me it's hard to have a tell. Like I'm more like it's easier to say when I'm really fatigued. That's usually when my speech gets a bit slurred.
Yeah. So
like struggle to speak. I guess English being my second language doesn't help either. And my right side is kind of the special one. So I limp. Usually during the day I manage to walk kind of normally now, but I limp and I shake way more. So like tremors come up, like especially if I have a bad night's sleep, like my tremors are really visible, and usually now they are under control. And when I'm really bad, I'm really tired to speak. Like I can't even speak.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah,
I guess the last one, because sorry, Ronnie, you mentioned work, and so that kind of like is deep in my heart because I'm career oriented. I'm really blessed to work full time. Really, I need to manage the days that I'm in the office because I feel like sensory overload from being working in open space. If there's too many people around, too many conversation, I can't take it for too long. It just tires me a lot.
Yeah, I mean, right now I like can't imagine getting through a day in an office because of that. And yeah, I don't know anyone else that has this understanding of fatigue and energy management that has a job. Just to be clear, I have something called trigeminal neuralgia. It's which lots of people with MS have, so you actually might know what it is. I am also I'm going through currently investigations into the possibility that I might have MS, because I've had a few instances in my past that I finally got a good neurosurgeon that cares. So I've just started that path to understand. So sorry for that tangent. I just realized I hadn't told you guys clearly where I was. But yeah, it's just it's very, very similar in the lifestyle and like the consequences on your quality of life. And yeah, I feel like, yeah, it's so familiar, everything here. It is a whole body thing, even though it's technically the trigeminal nerve in my brain. Obviously, like all the stimulation in life affects that for me. So it's pretty heavy. But you know, I'm here.
Yes.
That's right.
Please let you hear, Veronica.
Totally.
Yeah, like for my fatigue over the years now, I've sort of I can see it. It's really interesting. My key particular fatigue is after my infusions. So I have about 3 or 4 weeks bang on after my Ocrevus that I'm tired every day, and that's been consistent now. So I know I plan for that, which has been something that at least I know is going to happen when I have those doses of Ocrevus. And then yeah, just like you were saying, Veronica, I work in a school, so I got all the stimulus around me.
Yeah.
I got hundreds, I got 1,000 kids on site, you know, so it's getting harder and harder. Noises, you know, sharp noises, all those sorts of things are becoming difficult for me to handle. And yeah, I'm noticing I'm starting to get quite tired at work, so that's been passing through my sort of my brain now of whether I can pull back on my work a bit, and because I can in my job, it's not all teacher based, so I could work a bit from home. So yeah, it's just trying to look at those things, how to manage that fatigue. Yeah, it's quite but yeah, over the years it's, and like Nick said, a lot of it's trial by error as well. Sometimes not good, but yeah, you work at it.
Well, I think that slide that had the graph with the boom and bust and then learning your limit, I think that was really helpful for me, maybe because I'm a visual learner, but that kind of helped me think about, yeah, like the situation of if I was working and there was a deadline, you know, seeing where I could allow for that, and then what really is my limit if I know that I need to allow for these busts that I get like guaranteed to happen in a working environment, or a project-based working environment, which is what I was in. So yeah, it was like that sort of thing that was really like impactful for me.
And from my experience too, Ronnie, that once you sort of know that limit, it's quite nice to be able to make a conscious decision about like, okay, well, do I stop work now and go home, or walk away from my computer for an hour or whatever before coming back, or do I continue? And sometimes, like for me with my work, I'll be like, oh, actually, you know, I just want to, I know that this is going to push me over the edge, but I want to get this done, so then tomorrow I can have the whole day off or whatever. And because it's the weekend or something, you know. And so there's a conscious decision, but then at other times I'm like, well, actually, no, I don't want to go into a bust because of this, and so being able to make that decision rather than just sort of being carried along by circumstance and external pressures and kind of being forced into it without really wanting to. And I feel like that's a really that is quite I found it really demoralizing, I suppose, sort of being forced into these boom busts. So yeah, knowing your limits so you can at least choose is it's nice. Gives you a sense of agency.
Yeah. And that really comes back to that, like knowing, there was a point about knowing your values and priorities, right? So like you do, yeah, like for me, I get really heartbroken on how much of my like really, well, my social life I've completely lost a lot of my social community. And the one group of friends I have, you know, I put events or, you know, birthday dinners or something like that in my calendar, and I make sure that I am doing nothing that day before or, you know, and the day after. And yeah, it I lost my train of thought there, sorry, related to what you said, but where did it go? Anyway,
knowing limits and making a conscious decision.
Yeah,
and your values.
Right. Knowing those values and priorities helps you, like, gives you a bit more of a path with maybe feeling a little less disappointment because you know it is your value. So it's not like every time you have to cancel something is the same. Does that make sense?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Going back to making a mindful choice.
Yeah.
And knowing you have a choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's quite all for me, and I know probably Raffaella from knowing Raffaella as well, and that is fine, especially as looking at the physical side of things, is actually finding that limit. So sometimes you have to bust to find that limit.
100%.
Yeah, so you know, especially with MS or any other type of neurological FND or whatever neuralgia, you've got to find your limit, and every limit is different for everybody. But sometimes, I'd rather find that limit and then adjust myself to that than not ever get to that limit.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
And I think, and once you have found that limit, the other thing is too that and Anya, correct me if I'm wrong, but you know, through very, very, very careful, very slow increments, you're able to actually potentially move that limit up as well, and so that you can have more capacity. And so I think but Duncan, as you say, that limit is discovered by some booming and busting. But once you know, at least you know what you're working with, and you can optimize within it and even expand it a little bit.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think what Jessie mentioned as well, she mentioned about some sort of thing.
I did not get any of it.
Cut out.
To help fatigue. So, you know, it's the sleep, nutrition, and what's that?
Oh, sorry, you cut out just for a moment there.
Oh, you hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. About the other things that Jess was saying about the things too. Can you hear me?
Oh, it's just cutting in and out of it. Hi.
Yeah, cutting.
Gotcha.
Hello. Hello. Sorry.
Hi, no worries.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Hello. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just we were talking about the limit, and I was saying there's probably scope to increase that limit by addressing some of the other factors like the sleep and the relaxation and the exercise and fitness and breathing and all those other things that Jessie was talking about. So we then just got more scope there to work within. So yeah, I think you're probably right there, Nick, that you might find that actually that limit goes up a little bit.
Yeah,
totally.
Which would be great.
That relates really well with my journey with my physical fitness, because I originally was bedridden for 18 months when I first got diagnosed, and so I was starting a fitness journey from pretty much scratch, and I've never done that before because I've just always been an outdoors person. And I learned about like sort of pain by mathematics and sort of understanding, putting in a certain, amount of units of irritation to understand the sort of where you can tolerate. So it's like finding that limit. And I can't explain it without showing the table that I made up with my friends, but just like putting a unit to what's going in so that you can measure and, how much is going out and how much rest is needed, but also just understanding that irritating and tolerating, like where that feel that is. that was groundbreaking for me when I started to get into, just some strength training.
Yeah, awesome.
Mm.
Awesome. Yeah, no.
Sounds like you have a good understanding of your triggers, you know, and also what helps as well. So I think that's one of the first steps, isn't it, really, to be able to manage it better. So sounds like you're doing a good job.
Yeah, but thanks to mental fatigue, I've never written the stuff down.
Oh no.
It's all in here. Other than my pain by mathematics table. But that's it.
Fair enough.
So tonight's really, really helpful to realize, like, actually it's probably not helping that it's just in here and that it's not like out in a plan.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, maybe it's sort of experimenting with those, see if that helps at all.
Yeah.
Sorry guys, apologies, I've got to go and get my older daughter, so I just have to dash now, but lovely seeing you all.
Sure.
Lovely to meet you.
Great. Thanks for being here, Duncan. Have you
Yeah.
See you in the outdoors.
Yeah, absolutely. See ya.
Good night.